Hello, welcome to Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror. Today we're going to talk about Randotti. Look at all these beautiful skulls. All these plaster skulls. These are Randotti skulls. Well, most of them. There are a few that are not made by Randotti, but most of these are Randotti skulls. So we're going to talk about this company and these weird little skull souvenirs. Believe it or not, if you don't know, if you've never heard of Randotti or these skulls before, you might be surprised to know that these are Disneyland souvenirs. Randotti was a company with a business model based entirely on selling products like this, mostly plaster products, specifically to Disney theme parks. Originally Disneyland and then later Disney World. They also sold some things to Knott's Berry Farm, but the majority of what they did, the majority of their business by far was Disneyland and Disney World. So it was a family-run business, and the entire business was based on making stuff like these skulls and tombstones and little figurines and busts and plaster souvenirs to sell in the gift shops and souvenir stands in the Disney theme parks in the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the early 90s. Randotti went out of business in 1994. They started selling to Disneyland in 1956. Disneyland opened in 55. A year later, Disneyland began buying products from Randotti to sell in their souvenir stands. I discovered Randotti, well, I guess it was in the early 2000s, but when I realized what it was, but I first encountered the world of Randotti. It wasn't legitimately Randotti, which I'll explain, but it was the universe of Randotti. It was Randotti adjacent. I first encountered Randotti in the 90s. That was the first time I'd ever gone to Disneyland. My first trip to Disneyland was in the late 1990s. And I loved it. I'm glad I got to see a lot of the old park before it was renovated and changed and updated. I saw a lot of the original rides. I saw original Tomorrowland and Pirates of the Caribbean before it was changed, before certain things were taken out and other things related to the movies were added. It was Disneyland kind of, well, I was going to say that it kind of stayed frozen in time for several decades. I guess that's not really true, but the rate of change from the 50s through the 90s was much slower than once you got past the 90s, late 90s, then it really started to change. And it's not, well, I haven't been to Disneyland in a long time, but from what I understand, it's really not the same experience that it was back then. But, I understand that they can't, there's a multi-billion-dollar business. They can't base that on catering to nostalgic old weirdos who like the quaint, kitschy, politically incorrect, weird little attractions that they had 50 years ago. That's cool for nostalgia and historians and collectors, but you can't base a multi-billion-dollar current business on that. So, okay, I understand. Things have to change, but I'm glad I experienced the old, weird Disneyland. And I think a lot of vintage Disneyland enthusiasts, they like that weird, eccentric, oddball, kind of a relic from a bygone era that Disneyland represented. There was a lot of weird stuff in Disneyland, and Walt Disney was kind of a weird guy with unusual taste. Well, looking back on it from a modern perspective, it really wasn't unusual. He had mainstream taste. I mean, he created the mainstream. He was as mainstream as you could get. But compared to today, looking back on it, a lot of that seems kind of odd. And it's, Disneyland had a really weird vibe. There was a lot of macabre stuff in Disneyland. And I don't know what people were thinking when they went to Disneyland, to see Mickey Mouse and Pluto and all that. And the souvenir shops are full of skulls and other macabre items that Randotti made. But it worked for decades. People loved this stuff. And it was one of the highlights of the park. When they went to Disneyland, they wanted to see the skulls. And when I went to Disneyland, I didn't know what Randotti was. But I went to these souvenir stands. There's Adventureland, New Orleans Square, the open air stand, which was by the Jungle Cruise, and the Main Street Magic Shop. Those are some of the stands, the souvenir stands or souvenir shops. And I think it was the open air stand where I saw what I now know were not legit Randotti, but Randotti-esque stuff. I saw the skulls, and I thought, what is this? How come there's a bunch of skulls here? What's this all about? And they had barrels, like wine barrels, like big wooden barrels, this tall, full of rubber jigglers, big, heavy, smelly, oily rubber jigglers of snakes and lizards and spiders. And we're going to do an episode on those. I was just going through these barrels and thinking, what is this? Is like the land that time forgot. These toys are something you would have found 20, 30 years ago. What are they doing here now? And in such abundance. So you had a shop in Disneyland, instead of just, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, you've got barrels full of these smelly, oily, heavy rubber snakes and spiders. And then next to those, you had shelves full of skulls, all these different skulls. So I bought one. This is the one I bought from that trip to Disneyland. Now, I now know that this is not a Randotti skull. This is a knockoff. But it's a knockoff of a Randotti Harry Ivan. We'll talk about that in a second. So this is a knockoff Randotti. And it glows in the dark. Most of these things, I think, all of the skulls glow in the dark. A lot of the Randotti products glow in the dark. But this is not genuine Randotti. It looks like it. And at the time, I didn't know the difference. But this is what got me into Randotti. The fact that I bought this thing and then found out that it was part of this larger universe. And then eventually that it wasn't considered quite kosher. It wasn't original, genuine Randotti. It was a copycat. But it was the gateway. It was the thing that got me interested in Randotti. And I don't know exactly who made this skull. The skull I bought that day. It could be Cal Themes. It could be JIP. There was a company named JIP that knocked off Randotti, but it's my understanding that the JIP skulls were weird colors. They were all different colors. Now, we might as well start with the knockoffs first. This is another knockoff Randotti. This is Cal Themes. This is really nice condition. It's very, very much unused. And that's another knockoff Hairy Ivan, or Ivan the Hairy One. That would be the legit Randotti name, but this is a knockoff. And this is by Cal Themes. Let's see what this is a nice little tag here. Let's see what the tag says. Voodoo Glow Skulls. By somebody, by Trisha? I don't know. It's got a name there. T-R... Or is it P? I think it's a P. By Panji? I don't know. Can you see this name? Voodoo Glow Skull is by somebody, whoever that is. Trying to make it sound like it's a designer item. Let's see here. Glows with bright, eerie light for hours in the dark. Manufactured in USA. What is this? I think it's 68. Yeah, 1968 Cal Themes Inc. 1968. And this is another knockoff Randotti, and this is also Cal Themes. 1978 Cal Themes. And it glows in the dark. This is another Randotti knockoff skull. It's affixed to that card. So that's a 1970s knockoff of Randotti. So you've seen a 1990s knockoff, a 1970s knockoff, and a 1960s knockoff. So all of these companies, well, probably two, Cal Themes and JIP, are copying Randotti. And that's part of why Randotti went out of business in 1994, because Disney was buying the copycats instead of the real Randotti. Why? Who knows? But that's what put Randotti out of business. And also the founder passed away in 1987. So, buying that knockoff skull is what started me down the road of being interested in Randotti. I wanted to learn. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was cool, and I wanted to know more about it. What is this thing? And I learned, oh, it's a Randotti. Oh, okay. And then I learned, oh, no, it's not actually a Randotti. It's a knockoff of Randotti. And that happens a lot when I enter a new collecting genre. I start collecting a new category of something. A lot of the time, the first purchases that I make are not what I think they are. And Randotti's no exception. So my first Randotti purchase was a knockoff Randotti. But it got me interested, and then I learned what Randotti was, learned about the company, and then I was able to get serious about understanding what to look for to buy the original, real Randotti products. And I only buy the skulls. Randotti made approximately 175 items, and that included like figurines, like characters that were either Western or pirates or Haunted Mansion type characters to tie in with the different sections of the park. And they made tombstones, a lot of tombstones, Western tombstones and Haunted Mansion style tombstones. They made ashtrays, they made snakes, like coiled up snakes, but plaster, not rubber, plaster snakes, like rattlesnakes coiled up. And you could use them as a paperweight or an ashtray. They made busts. They made a lot of Abraham Lincoln stuff, Lincoln busts. They made busts of composers like Beethoven and Berlioz. They made wall plaques. They had a series of plaques that had buzzards, vultures on the plaque. All kinds of stuff. All kinds of items made of plaster. They were all... I don't think Randotti made anything that wasn't made of plaster. They were all plaster and molded using rubber molds. So let's... since we were talking about Harry Ivan, let's get that out of the way. This is the... Gotta be careful. This is, I guess, the superstar of the Randotti world. It's Ivan. Ivan the hairy one. I don't want to hold this one by the cord, because this is real. This isn't a knockoff. So here's Ivan the hairy one. And that's a real Randotti. Hairy Ivan. You can see he's got his cord to hang him by, and he's got a tag. Can we see the tag without destroying it? Oh, come on. Let's... Oh, there we go. Do they have any stickers on him? Yes, he does. Is that a Disneyland sticker? Yes, it is. Disneyland, $3.75 plus tax. That's reasonable. So there's a sticker. Let me see here. I was showing you the back of the tag, actually. Let me see if I can show you the front. The back of the tag says Voodoo Skull glows in dark. Exposed to... Oh, and it's got a year. What is this? 1967, I think. 1967 R. Smith. Which we'll explain who R. Smith is in a second. Okay, let me see if I can get this tag with the name Ivan on it so you can see it properly. There we go. There's the name, Ivan, the hairy one. Yeah, so someone commented on one of my videos that I act like I'm gonna have a heart attack handling this stuff. Yeah, because I actually care about the condition of these vintage items. This isn't junk from Target. These are vintage, decades old, and they're very fragile, and they can fall apart if you just handle them the wrong way. So, yeah, you've got to be careful with this stuff. Let's see here. Okay, so that was a real Randotti Ivan the Hairy One. That's the most iconic Randotti product. The rarest one would be this blue one, which we'll talk about later. So, I do have notes. But yeah, I don't think I need these notes. I've already talked about some of this. But we'll just talk about the founder, John Randolph Smith, whose nickname was Randy Smith, born in 1917. And interestingly, he was born in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm coming to you right now from an undisclosed location within the St. Louis metropolitan area. So Randy was a fellow St. Louisan, like Vincent Price. But he didn't stay in St. Louis. He moved to Southern California at some point because Randotti is a Southern California-based company. And Randy was the grandson of a famous Old West crime boss named Jefferson Soapy Smith. And apparently Jefferson Soapy Smith is kind of a legendary Old West character. He was a gambler and a con man and a crime lord. And he was shot to death. He wasn't a gunslinger. He was more like a kingpin kind of a character. And Randy Smith grew up hearing these colorful stories about his famous grandfather, and that kind of influenced his tastes. So Randy Smith, his taste kind of ran towards the eccentric. He liked magic and gambling, but not like, he wasn't like a gambler, gambling to waste money. He liked like kind of old-timey, quaint sort of the mystique of gambling and shell games and three-card Monte and kind of card hustling and that kind of thing. But as an enthusiast, not someone trying to rip anybody off. By trade, his career was engineering. He was an engineer until his plaster skull company took off. He was married twice, and his second wife was Dorothy Smith, whose nickname was Dottie. So you got Randy Smith married to Dottie Smith. And they started, well, I don't know if, well, Randy started the company sometime in the 1950s. And as I said, Disneyland opened in 55, and in 56 they began buying what became known as Randotti Products. The company was simply called RJ originally. I think the first, at least the first decade or more, it was just RJ. And some of the products just have RJ, or you saw the Ivan just said R. Smith on it. And then around 67-ish, they changed their name to Randotti, which of course is Randy Smith and Dottie Smith put together, Randotti. And I think by then Randy Smith had quit his engineer job and he was full-time with Randotti. And from now on, I'm going to just call it Randotti, even if I'm talking about the early days of the company. It was RJ originally, but I'm just going to refer to it always from here on out as Randotti, because that's what the company is known as today, and it's famously known as Randotti. So the company started in Randy Smith's backyard. He built a little building dedicated just for Randotti. And in that little building in the backyard, he made all these plaster products. And he sculpted most of it. They had some outside sculptors, but most of it was sculpted by him. And it was a family thing. He got his kids involved. It was a family business. Then in around 1967, when they changed the name from RJ to Randotti, they moved the company out of the backyard to Stanton, California, into a proper commercial building. So then they had finally an actual headquarters and manufacturing center in this proper commercial building in Stanton, California. In 1971, Disney World opened, and right away the vendors there started purchasing Randotti products to sell in the souvenir stands in Disney World, and they did phenomenally well. And Disney World couldn't even keep them in stock. They didn't ship these delicate skulls. I think they always drove them over there, but they couldn't get enough to meet the demand in Disney World. They sold so well. They were in such high demand in this Disney World. Now, today, if you go to Disneyland, Disney World, wherever, most of the products you find are made by Disney, or they're licensed through Disney. So maybe another mainstream company manufactures it, but it has a license through Disney, and it's a Disney IP. It's a Disney character, a Disney property. But this was a weird time. There was a lot of weird things about Disney back then. This was a weird time when you could have products in the parks that didn't have anything directly to do with Disney. Disney didn't make the products. They bought them from outside companies. And although there might be some thematic link, like a skull could link to the Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean, they weren't necessarily directly connected officially to any particular Disney attraction or Disney film or Disney character. And that's not the way it is now. Now if you go into Disneyland, you go into the shops, it's, all copyright Disney. Everything's Disney characters, and most of it's made by Disney. Most of the products are made by Disney. So these kind of, among all their other charms, they represent a different time where you could just find some oddball, weird stuff at Disneyland. And it wasn't Mickey Mouse, and it wasn't Pluto, Donald Duck, Minnie Mouse. It wasn't Star Wars or Marvel or something. It was out of left field, weird stuff like skulls and snakes and oddball things like that. And some of the Randotti stuff later on did link directly to certain attractions, but in the beginning it was all just kind of generic, and it just sort of in a vague way fit different parts of the park, like a skull fit the Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean. I discovered the knockoff one, I think it was the Open Air shop, which was by the Jungle Cruise, that souvenir stand. But I think the most iconic of the souvenir stands, if you want to call it that, it's really not a stand, it's a shop, would be the Main Street Magic Shop. Whenever you see photos of vintage Randotti, there's several photos floating around online of Randotti products back in the day at Disneyland. The ones you see most often seem to be taken in the magic shop. In fact, maybe all of them, come to think of it, are from the magic shop. And they show Dotti Smith in the photo. If you see a lady in the photo who seems to be working there, have something to do with the shop, that's Dotti Smith. I wish I could have gone to the magic shop back then in the 60s or 70s. I'm old enough, ancient enough, to have actually experienced real magic shops. Not that one, not the Disney one, but in the St. Louis area, there were magic shops when I was growing up. But I remember those weird old magic shops, going to those as a kid. And it was a place where you would find something you wouldn't see anyplace else. And that's gone. I mean, today there really isn't. I mean, what product will you not find anyplace else? You just go online and get anything you want. I guess the equivalent to a modern day magic shop would be Spirit Halloween. That's kind of taken the place of what those shops used to be. But the magic shops had magic supplies in addition to the makeup and the masks and all that weird stuff. They also had actual magic supplies, and I don't know where to go now to get magic supplies. I mean, online, but a lot of those shops were run by people who used to be or still were magicians, not famous magicians, not really, really successful magicians, but people who had some knowledge of magic and had some involvement with magic, and they could do like a magic trick if there was a kid came into the store. There was a weird vibe, kind of like being in Willy Wonka's office, except he doesn't yell at you, hopefully. But there was something very quaint and strange about those magic shops. And that has nothing to do with Randotti, but just thinking about those images of the Disneyland magic shop and the Randotti skulls and the Dom Post masks, it just makes me think, even though I didn't experience that at Disneyland, when I think of the skulls, I think of those magic shops. Even though I wouldn't go to like a St. Louis magic shop and see a Randotti skull, but they're part of that world. They're part of that mystique of the magic shop is imbued into these skulls because they were so well known for being in that Disneyland magic shop. But that's a long journey on a side road. Back to Randotti proper. Randy Smith, I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to look at my notes just to make sure. Randy Smith passed away in 1987. Don't want to get that date wrong. He passed away in 1987, and the company went out of business in 1994. And I don't know if there was any issue there with like the changing of the guard, kind of shook things up a little, but the main problem was Disney just wasn't buying their products anymore. They were buying the knockoffs, like I was showing you at the beginning. For some reason, Disneyland decided they'd rather buy the knockoffs. Whatever was going on there. And because Randotti's entire business model basically was based on selling to this one client, Disney with their theme parks, if they lost that client, they lost their business. And that's what happened. So, before I ever visited Disneyland, Randotti was already no more. But there was still that echo of Randotti. Disney was still kind of perpetuating an illusion that Randotti skulls were still part of the park, because they knew people still wanted to see that. They were expecting that when they went to the park. They expected to see the skulls. They might not know Randotti from Randolph Scott, but they knew that there were skulls at Disneyland, and if they'd grown up with that, they want to take their kids to see the skulls. So Disney knew that they should keep skulls in the souvenir shops, but for some reason not skulls made by Randotti. So that's what happened to the company. Okay, so let's see, what can we do? Well, let's start. This is the small skull, and it sure is small. Look at that. That is the small skull, and it is small. very small. I don't know how much that cost when it was new. I think the auction company was estimating it at $200 to $400. I don't think it goes that high, but I mean, I'm sure it isn't cheap, but it's not that high. Here is the Pirate Necker. That's what it's called. It's a necker, pirate necker. So it has a plastic cord on it to hang around your neck. And one eye is a fake jewel. And it's flat on the other side. That's called a pirate necker. Okay, so this is not a comprehensive collection. I mean, it's decent, but I don't have every single skull they made. This is the medium skull. So we saw a small skull, now here's the medium one. It's a little bigger than a baseball. Now that's an iconic Randotti skull. And part of the look of Randotti, the reason that it is iconic, is because the skulls don't just look like skulls. There's almost a Lucio Fulci sort of decrepitness about the skulls. They're rotting or melting or decaying, deformed. Something's going on. They're not just normal skulls. There's a creepiness to them, and the way they're sculpted. I mean, like no one's head is really shaped like that. All right, so that's a medium skull. This is a large skull. These are heavy. I can imagine buying one of these in the park, like if you were a kid and you bought this in the park, you're carrying this around all day in the park. And they're fragile. I mean, if you bumped against stuff, you'd chip. So anyway, here's the large skull. And that is big and heavy. It's a big, heavy skull. Very unique sculpt and very influential. A lot of modern sculptors, like people in the mask making community, are highly influenced by the look of Randotti because it's a very unique take on a human skull. When most people sculpt a skull, they don't make it look like this. This is very unique. I mean, they make it look like this now because of Randotti, because they're influenced by Randotti, but generally, if they're not trying to make it look like Randotti, then they're not going to have that whatever is going on with those jaws. Well, okay, so now let's look at this one. two completely different sculpts. I was looking to see some Randottis have sculpts in common where they tweak a sculpt, but that's not the case with the medium skull and this one. I want to say this is probably, because we'll just show it. This is the spider skull because it has a spider, and I think that's a creepy crawly's spider on top. I could be wrong about that. I think that's where that sculpt for the spider came from, but you can see it's got the skull itself is rotting, it's deteriorating. It has that pockmarked look. See, I mean, it's like it's been in the ground for 100 years. I mean, who makes a skull look like that? And I think this sculpt originated as the voodoo skull. And I don't have just a plain old voodoo skull without a spider. And I think Ivan is also, I think, a voodoo skull. But I could be wrong about that. I mean, the basis of it is a voodoo, and then they tweaked it, like they added this spider or hair or whatever. So let me take a look at Ivan now. Is this the same? Yeah, more or less. I think there's definitely some commonality in these two sculpts. If it's not the same exact sculpt, I think they definitely share a common heritage at some point. Hopefully I can show these without damaging them. Okay, there we go. So yeah, you can see there's some there. If it isn't the exact same base skull underneath, I do think these both started as the same sculpt at one point, and then they were tweaked to make two different characters. And there's a lot of Randotti skulls that have things in common like that. Okay, well, let's look at this one. Is this the biggest? Yeah, I think this is the biggest skull. Got some hair following it. Like a hitchhiking ghost following it. Okay. So this is the laughing skull. This is heavy. It's heavy. That's the laughing skull. This is the laughing skull, and it does look kind of like it's laughing. And this is the most realistic looking Randotti skull. This one doesn't have that very highly stylized look like a skull that's been, I don't know, mutating and disintegrating. It has, I mean, it still has a little bit of that weathering, like on its eyebrows, on its brow. You can see it's got a deterioration there. But it's more naturalistic. It looks more like an actual human skull. It's not as stylized. And this thing is heavy. Boy, is it heavy. And that is called the laughing skull. The laughing skull. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Can I put him back with that? Well, let's not put him. Let's just sit him there. He's fine right there. He's good. It says 1974 Randotti. 1974 Randotti. Okay, we'll put you back here. Yeah, you're fine. Okay. All right, now let's look at the pirate skull because it's right in front of me. I'm not sure if this pirate skull shares a sculpt with any other skull. I think this might have only been used for the pirate skull. And there's not like a base to hold it with. This one's going to be a little more delicate to handle. Got to be careful with this one because the other ones have like a little neck area that I can kind of grab. This one doesn't. So that's the pirate skull. And I don't know if there's another skull that has this sculpt without the eye patch. I'm not sure. Again, that's a very realistic looking skull. That's not stylized like some of them. It's a very true to life, very naturalistic. Looks like a regular human skull. Only it's got an eye patch. And there is another version of this that has a square eye patch, and it's on the opposite eye. And that skull does look different. I prefer this one, the one I've got. I think it looks better. I'm not as fond of the square eye patch. So that's the pirate skull. Okay, now let's look at the snake skull, or as it's officially called, large skull with snake. It's got remnants of a price sticker here. Let's see if there's anything left I can read. Nah, it's not much of it's left. Can't see it. But there's a remnants of a Disneyland sticker on the bottom. What year is this? It just says 891 Randotti. Well, we know if it's Randotti, then it's post 1967 because it doesn't say RJ. It says Randotti. Well, here's more writing. 1966 Dotti Smith. So on one side it says copyright 1966 Dotti Smith, and then on the other side it says 891 Randotti. So I think this one on this side was added later. Probably the 66 ones are the original marking. Okay, this is another heavy one. Let's get him out here. That's another iconic Randotti skull. That's quite a sculpture. Just the way that snake goes in and out of the skull. It's very well done. It's very well thought out. All the different angles. It creates a very dynamic look. It almost looks like ram's horns or something on here. It has a kind of a demonic look. And there's the snake on top. So I've got one more left to go here. Let's there we go. Okay, let's put you over here. And you over here. Okay. This is the Silly Harry. And this was the skull that was produced in the lowest numbers. They made fewer of these than any other skull. There's another version called Harry Hilarious that cut the back of the skull off. It made it flat and had an indentation where you were supposed to put a laughing box. I don't know, a laugh box, whatever. Like I guess it's a battery operated thing that goes ha 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 ha. But they didn't sell it with that. It wasn't included, so I'm not sure what the deal was with that. That's kind of strange. But this is that's a variant. This is the basic one, the Silly Harry. And this has a price sticker. Let's see what it says. Yeah, it's a Disneyland. It says $8. Walt Disney Productions. It's got, I think, like a Mickey Mouse on there. I don't want the hair to come off. Hair's glued on. Okay, so now all these skulls glow in the dark. And this one does too, even though it's blue. It also glows in the dark. And those pupils on the eyes, those are made of felt. They're felt and glued on. There's the Disneyland sticker on the bottom. So this is the rarest one. And traditionally this one tends to be the most expensive. This one, Silly Harry, and the Harry Hilarious version tend to be the most expensive ones and the hardest ones to find. And they had the lowest production run of any of the skulls. I think that was because the blue glow paint was expensive. It's different. It's definitely different from the other ones. So let's put you back there. And like I said, I think every one that's on this shelf here does glow in the dark. So I will I'll shoot some video. I'll put you here. I'll shoot some video in a moment of all these things glowing in the dark. Okay. All right. So I guess we'll just, right now, we'll cut to that video so you can see what do these things look like glowing in the dark. wasn't that amazing. I hope it was, because I haven't shot it yet. I'll shoot it later and cut it in. But I'm sure it looked fantastic, didn't it? I hope so. So, here are the Randotti skulls. Now, there's a few I don't have. Like, I don't have a basic voodoo skull. And there's a few others. There's one that has an incense burner on the top, and they made some in different colors, like psychedelic colors, that look like they might glow in black light. And there's different ones. There's some other small ones, like Ivan. There's a little Ivan, a little version of that. And although I have these two gray-haired Ivan copycats, or white-haired Ivan copycats, I only have a genuine Ivan with black hair. They did make it with white hair, so Randotti did make a genuine Ivan with white hair. I don't have that. There was one on eBay just recently, so they turn up, and that is something I like to have one of these days. I'd like to get a white-haired, genuine Randotti Ivan, and I'd like to get a voodoo skull, which I think is simply the Ivan without the hair. But since I don't own one, I can't say for sure, but I think that's what it is. I'm satisfied with this. If I never buy another Randotti skull, I'm fine. But if I did go forward with buying more, I would want a white-haired Ivan and a voodoo skull. I think I've got all the big ones. I think all the big skulls are represented here. But there's other small skulls. This for a niche collecting category, this takes the cake. It's not just collecting skulls, but collecting skulls made by this particular company for sale at Disneyland or Disney World, specific theme parks. It's just odd how these plaster skulls have such a mystique, but they do. They certainly do. Even if you didn't grow up seeing them at Disneyland or Disney World, they still are so evocative of this past time, these tastes that don't exist anymore, a time where something like this would make sense and people would be excited about a plaster skull. That was a different world back then. Well, I'm excited about these plaster skulls, so maybe tastes haven't changed that much. A lot of people are interested in these. As I was saying, they've inspired a lot of modern mask makers and special effects people who sculpt skulls in a similar style. And the famous artist Coop did a series of pieces, illustrations based on Randotti skulls. I think he bought somebody's Randotti collection and then did a series of work, a series of paintings, series of illustrations inspired by those skulls. So they get around. They've had their influence, and they continue to influence artists, sculptors, painters. So you might see a mask or something of a skull that looks a little familiar because that artist was probably influenced by the look of Randotti skulls. I think that's about it for this episode. Like I said, we'll do an episode on the jigglers that were at these souvenir shops. I don't know if that'll be the next episode, but it'll be coming up. I do want to I might as well cover that as well, since I have some of those jigglers and I have the memory of seeing them. And most of the ones I have, I bought personally directly from Disneyland. So it's not just something I got off eBay. Unlike most of this, except for that one knockoff skull, all of these skulls came from, I think every one of them came from eBay. I don't know if I bought any of them like person to person from a dealer. I don't think so. I think they all came from eBay except for the one knockoff that I bought at Disneyland. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at Randotti's skulls. And if you liked it, hey, please subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to Basement of Horror. And if you want more Basement of Horror, you can join our Facebook group. We have a very nice Facebook group, and it would be even nicer if you were a part of it. So join the Basement of Horror Facebook group. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked it. I hope you consider it time well spent. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Until next time, Basement of Horror will return.